able to trace that auto rickshaw because she didn't fed her mobile number, she used it some other mobile and the mobile was not there, and somehow we were not able to trace, and she sent us a notice of 50 lakh rupees for lack of service that we have given to her. We are very liberal. We are trying to be as consumer friendly as possible. A service which was the most needed in the country, and whatever cab services that were available before we came in picture, you can imagine that earlier radio taxis were considered as a status symbol. If you use radio taxi inside the city for any other purpose you go, and now today Ola or the other people, I mean other services, they are using as if you want to even go to buy vegetables, you can take a cab. So let me come to the perspective that, you know, what is it that we are currently doing for the consumers. If you have seen, or if you have been using it regularly, you must have seen the change in the mobile application now. We have introduced the safety features in the mobile application. There is an interesting thing. I mean, there are a couple of complaints that we were receiving, especially from our women customers, that their mobile numbers are being leaked to the drivers, and that was something which was a very serious issue for us. And we did so last month we have introduced the number masking feature, so now your number is not being revealed to the driver anymore. So we are innovating on this, and for us, customer rights are, I mean, for us, our business is only about what customer perceives about us, you know. If he likes our service, if he recommend us on Mouthshut or anywhere else, I mean, we are the happiest people. But the most important thing here is, we also really wanted a favor from customer's side. You know, the driver who is taking you for a ride is not as educated or as literate as you are. He is a person who have been driving for his bread and butter. We have been, as a company, always try to give them the basic fundamental sensitization training for a day or a half, because now there are more than 3.5 lakh drivers on our platform, and every day the number is increasing. It's a mammoth task to train them, and that's a space where we want you know, government support. We are talking with the government to, you know, help us in getting these drivers appropriately trained. We want the government to you know, certify them, help these drivers to rehabilitate appropriately, because, you know, on our platform, if you have a commercial driving license, if you have a valid police verification, you have all your credentials, you can become a valid driver for us. But for us, it is really important that what is the customer experience after that. So again, we have started a new thing which is going to help customers, and where customers' role is very important. The star rating after every ride that you give. Interestingly, I myself have started feeling when I'm using Ola, because I don't use my personal car anymore now from last 1 year. The change in driver's philosophy, because there is a star rating after every ride, you can feel that now he's calling you with a good morning or good evening, and he's opening gate for you, just because he's worried that if his star rating goes below a level, either he'll be moved from our platform, or there will be cut in his incentives that we pay him, or whatever he earns. These small things are actually helping the customers to, you know, get a better experience. But it is really important that we need a reciprocation from customers also. You know, they should appropriately rate the drivers, or they should give their honest feedback. But transportation is something which is the most dynamic sector and the most important thing which connects to us directly now. Everybody wants a transportation which is reliable, safe, and secure. But we are very, you know, sometimes we become very short-tempered for a small mistake by a driver, or if he's running a little fast because you are getting late and there is a speed breaker and the customer got angry and he gave him 1 star. So you have to understand the psychology of the person with whom you are dealing and you are rating. And the both-way interactions will obviously gonna improve the services in a bigger way. Thanks.
I'm going to jump in from an operator's perspective, not from a lawyer or a founder or something else. Uh, Very simple. There are two key issues. So the framework that Michael laid out is fantastic. But from an operator's perspective, the way I look at it is that the majority of it is hygiene work, which our dear friends, the lawyers, will recommend, and somebody in the team will implement. Right? That's hygiene. The two areas which are not hygiene in that piece, I think are the areas that are worth discussing, because those are the areas which are genuinely broken in this country. The first is data privacy. I don't know a single person who is not spammed, who has retained his mobile, for example, I've got my number for 15 years. I get calls from real estate brokers from God knows when, talking about properties which I had 10 years ago and still trying to list them for sale or for rent, or I have a client. My number is probably circulated everywhere I know. The second, email. I actually have a dedicated email account for subscribing to any e-commerce oriented website. And I have a couple of colleagues of mine who have managed getting that wonderful address without me ever subscribing to them. My email, that email ID has been floating around, and I probably get 100 emails on that. It's been around since 2003, and that particular ID. And I probably get 100 emails a day, most of which are genuinely spam, right? Unsolicited emails, right? And I think those are the two areas. So that's one key area, which I think is completely broken, data privacy. I think the second area which is completely broken is dispute resolution, right? Disputes happen. There are always going to be some unhappy customer at some point in time. The question really is, and I'm not going to limit the dispute resolution to the company's act within its own customer service department, because all of us follow fairly liberal policies on that front. But there are slip-ups. There are customers who have used a particular product and still want to return it. And frankly, I sit on the board of 5 startups, and I run 2 companies, and I've run 2 startups before this. So I've seen the B2C commerce space extremely closely, and different price points. Extremely recently, we received a notice from someone who had bought a sari for 28 or 29,000 rupees. So this is not a woman who is not affluent or not educated, bought a sari that was fairly expensive, used it. It has a pinhole in it where she's pegged it up, right? She sent it for a return, for a refund. It has a pinhole. It has perfume on it, okay? And the woman insists it's never used, right? And when we refuse to honor that refund, saying the product has been used more, at least on a single occasion, right? The ironing is off, the packaging is missing, there is perfume on it, and there's a pinhole on your pallu. Right? I mean, let's be rational. Nope. Right? And we received notice for that as well. So the question is, there are always going to be irrational customers and some rational customers that slip through the net. Everyone is not irrational. And the question really comes around to, how do we resolve disputes? And the challenge over there, frankly, from my perspective, and talking from a startup's perspective, and really, e-commerce is more or less a startup kind of environment. Startups grow really quickly. They'll start with and not pertaining to your business really, because you guys are a cab space, but they'll start with a 2,000 square foot warehouse, and in 6 months they'll realize, oh, that's too small, let's move to a 6,000 square foot or a 10,000 square foot, and then move to 50,000 square feet. What happens is, every time you move, that most of your legal notices actually reach your warehouses. Half of them reach warehouses which you've already left, right? As a result of which, the startup is clueless about a case until and unless someone actually ends up either with a non-bailable warrant from a cop showing up at your door, right, saying that, oh, you have not respected this particular court's order, because all the notices were going to some funky warehouse, which you had three years ago, or a year ago, or last year, or whatever, right? Or it'll be a notice that shows up with an order which has been already awarded ex parte, right? And most startups, I find, are struggling to deal with this format, because startups don't have the ability to be present in 100+ district courts all over the country, right? They don't have the wherewithal to keep hiring lawyers everywhere. And to some extent, I think there is institutional support that is required, or a process that is required to create this dispute resolution format in a more simplified perspective for both the customer, because for a customer going to a consumer court and getting an order is no simpler than for a startup trying to address it, right? So if we can come to a solution or a system by which we address dispute resolution in a more friendly manner, I think that's the other piece that I would bring up as the relevant piece which is broken in this country. Right? So those are my 2 bits on this, and with that,
thank you. Well, I think everybody over here has spoken about how a startup needs to get protected and why a customer, or sometimes that a customer does misbehave. But let me try and lay a brand perspective on gathering consumer data. As a brand, I am trying to create affinity with a customer. So it is genuinely, if I have to do a good job of creating a product or a relationship or a marketing communication, I have to understand and gather this customer behavior data to actually do a genuinely good job to create this brand that I'm trying to create. So, for example, Karya is trying to offer the best possible fit. So from that point of view, it is my job to understand minute details about her measurements, minute details about her preferences, minute details about what colors she likes, what colors she doesn't like. So 1, at least I try and serve her better next time. And 2, genuinely, if I'm able to create more products for her, I can create something which is more relevant rather than just creating something and experimenting with it. So from a brand's perspective, it is absolutely imperative for me to collect and then consume this customer-consumer data that they are willing to share. So sometimes I don't even understand why is it such a big deal that customers sharing the data. They're sharing it very willingly, right? I mean, of course, it's my job to protect that data, but from a brand's perspective, it is absolutely imperative for me to collect all these minute details that I am responsible to not share further, but certainly go a really long way in me creating this affinity or relationship with the brand. So to your point, Gaurav, I mean, when you say customers do come back with shirts which are stained with sweat and food, and yeah, we do have to accept them, otherwise they have gone to consumer forums, and yes, of course, that legal notice situation has happened with us as well. But all things said and done, let's understand the intention with which this data is collected, and let's also understand the intention with which it is safeguarded, right? So from that point of view, I guess all I'm trying to say is it's for a brand to actually genuinely create a relationship, gathering such detailed customer behavior and consumption data is absolutely imperative.
Those were terrific comments, panelists. I heard a number of different themes in there. The plea for self-regulation, which I understand means, probably staying away from the more prescriptive approach. The point about the importance of innovation to solve customer complaints and how that drives to customer protection ultimately. The comment about ratings, that's interesting. Ratings certainly do create tremendous accountability, but I get your point about having to consider the ratings carefully because not everybody acts necessarily rationally. Interesting, Gaura, you sort of pointed out particular areas that need some considerable improvement, the data protection, the privacy. Again, remember when I was talking about the states, we have specific spam rules. I guess we don't have spam rules here in India, but addressing those issues. Dispute resolution, absolutely. I don't know whether there's learning here in India currently on sort of how usually disputes are resolved in the United States. Sonia, I think it's fair to say that most e-commerce sites refer to some arbitration, and generally speaking, those kind of clauses are enforced as long as the contract has been properly formed. Actually, there was a Supreme Court case recently where the Supreme Court said the arbitration was fine, but the arbitration clause, for different reasons, went on to say you, the consumer, you, the customer, can only bring individual actions against the vendor. You can't join a class action. And that part the Supreme Court didn't like so much and held that to be unconstitutional. But absolutely, dispute resolution, and to the extent that things can be sort of more channeled, because otherwise, I mean, the transactions costs that we're adding at some point potentially defeat the whole economic model. And Nidhi, you know, your points about collecting consumer data to do a good job for the customer, as we were talking before we started, at least from a U.S. perspective, it really would come, there would be nothing kind of preventing you from doing so. It would come down to disclosure, you know, what purpose, what am I collecting? We'll get into some of that in a moment. And then, again, in the United States, the whole issue of security, so making sure you've got good security protecting that data. So maybe now we turn to some couple of questions and hopefully, but I first absolutely would like to hear questions from the audience.
I have a question for Mr. Singatia. I am an Ola loyalist, and I think the service is a boon for people like me who don't know how to drive. So a part of this whole consumer rights and everything also relates to consumer loyalty and taking care of consumers' interests. A lot of times we've been hearing when we are on the drive that the drivers say that please do not, if the cops stop us on our way, please do not tell that you're using using Ola or using the app and all of that. Now, situations like that do create a surmise for customers like us as to what's the longevity of these services, because we really want to believe and we really want the services to stay. But when we hear comments like this, it's like a little bit of surmise in our minds. So is there anything you'd like to say on that, sir?
Yeah, so specifically for Delhi, we have been struggling for some reasons. You know, there is a regulatory framework that government is trying to put across, and the regulatory framework is square and our business is round, so they just wanted to push the round body in a square body. So there is a negotiation that is going on at every level, and we now what happened that, you know, if you are reading newspapers just 2 days, 3 days back only, so Delhi High Court have now allowed everybody to shift to the clean fuel by 1st of March, and that will now stop all the problems that you might have facing by now. And we actually keep on educating our customers regarding the changes. We send SMSs, we send emails, and we just keep them abreast with the latest developments. But sometimes what happens that regulatory things are so fluid and so flexible. Someday they say it's fine, and other day they say no, it's not happening. So, and since we are new, the government is also new about this whole system, and there were traditional players who are struggling for their existence. So there is a tussle that is on the ground for sure, but then yes, from now onwards, I assure, and I think now everybody will feel the difference. Now you will not find any driver saying you that don't tell the cops. Nobody will gonna stop you now. Thanks.
I understand we have time for a couple of more questions. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of an add-on to what Mike mentioned a little while ago. Consumer rights in India typically, when you mentioned about class rights, there are two sides to it, or two buckets to it. Consumer rights typically mean deficiency in service to a customer, and therefore it is an individual relief. But the moment the dispute is of a nature which is beyond an individual, and it's a class action kind of a situation, we have the Competition Commission now, where if we just step aside from the e-com perspective and just look at some other examples, like DLF is a glaring example, where in one of the projects they kind of behaved in a manner which was beyond the terms and conditions of the contract, and which was a dominant behavior. A humongous fine was imposed. The difference being that Competition Commission does not compensate the consumer or the complainant, but still, nevertheless, that's a threat which is something to watch out for as much as for the e-com companies, right, when they're talking about consumer issues, because there's a larger threat which could be higher in pecuniary consequences, even if it does not go to the consumer's pockets. So consumer rights has to be looked at from both the perspectives. of a threat of a dominant action as well as an individual violation of a consumer.
Interesting. So I imagine the commission can issue orders and the company is going to have a problem if it doesn't abide by the order.
They can impose fines, and the fines are usually based on the industry denomination. I mean, they have their own methods of calculating how to impact that industry or that company based on projections of profits and etc. So the net effect of that is quantum, multifold of maybe 500x of what an individual could have been paid. So the company actually ends up compensating something like 500 or 5,000 consumers without anybody getting the money. Yeah. But the net effect, the cash effect comes down.
By the way, that happens with class actions in the United States as well.
Exactly. That's why I mentioned, because you mentioned
the lawyers walk off with the money.
I'd just like to quickly bring my point of view in on there. The challenge, so e-commerce per se, the large part of e-commerce investment comes from international investors. So, Michael asked that question earlier. Of the 9 billion or so that got invested last year, how much is international? And, I told him maybe 80% or more. Yeah. So, typically, most of the invested e-commerce companies follow fairly global guidelines. The challenge is not so much in terms of the hygiene factors that we do. Right? So most of the things that you're pointing out, Michael, that's stuff that we've ticked the box on, right? So all those things are hygiene factors, and that's why I say they're hygiene factors. Now, when I took over, for example, this role at India Today, I took over a company called Bag It Today as well, right? Now, while we have individual contracts which are signed with consumers, none of those, when these orders are being presented ex parte, or from a court's perspective, the second party's perspective, whether it's the contract that we've signed or anything else, is not presented. That order has been issued. We have not received a copy of it. We have not participated in that discussion. And the law is absolutely, when it comes to e-commerce, our own judicial system, and this is particularly at the district and smaller courts, it is some sort of magic fair for them. They don't get it. Neither do the tax authorities, by the way. So, we've had those conversations with tax as well, right? How does a company's valuation jump from 10 rupees to 20,000 rupees a share in 1 year? No, there has to be something the company's loss-making. We, from a systemic perspective, right, the understanding of the digital economy in our traditional, let's say, practices, whether it's law, whether it's tax, right, the primary regulatory practices that affect business, right, it's archaic. It's archaic, and where it's present, it's practically non-existent, right? And that is the problem that we need to sort. And that's why I said that we need a systemic solution for dispute resolution, right? At the end of the day, there has to be some set of guidelines that if a district or a consumer court is presented with a notice, right, or a case, right, they ask for at least the basics. Okay, do you purchase from XYZ company? What are the terms you agreed under? I may have arbitration patched into my agreement, right? But if in case the order has been placed by the justice in my absence, right, that has no relevance. Right? I can keep trying to, I can go and say, okay, fine, it's a 25,000 rupee order against me for a product that costs 1,000 rupees. But what's the cost of actually legislating and saying that, okay, I want to dispute this? It costs me too much.
Yeah. So just two inputs on that specifically. One is a consumer action versus an arbitration clause in the agreement. I'm not too sure if there's an exception to that. The law is substantially clear that if there is indeed an element that the transaction falls within the definition where the buyer is a consumer, there are a lot of exceptions, so those don't fall a part of that. Then as a consumer, he has a right under law. And through a contract, you cannot contract out of law. So even if there's an arbitration clause, as long as the transaction qualifies for a consumer action, the buyer is a consumer and you are a vendor under the Consumer Protection Act, that action will lie. That's number one. Number two, yes, the problem of something like 800 consumer courts or 700 consumer courts all over the country, there is no institutional framework. I don't expect that to be likely to come because the law is what it is, unless there is substantial change that you cannot decide unless both sides are represented, which could be misused as well. So the closest to home solution for big e-com companies where they can afford is to retain firms like us, which are not selling, to have a pan-India presence. But yes, there are similar solutions available for smaller startups as well. But that's something off the record, something. But that's a problem, yes.
Do we have time for another? Do we? One last one before you give us the hook? Yeah?
Michael, my question is directed perhaps to you and to learn from the American experience. I know that in the United States we have commentators such as Niall Ferguson at Harvard who've talked about this shift, and he's quipped that we've got to change from the rule of law to the rule of lawyers. And this essentially picks up on Faisal's point, is that it's becoming so prohibitive now for startups to have to deal with this regulatory maze. I mean, to what extent do you think you could make the argument that the application of regulation to startups is a barrier to entry and raises competition law issues? And do you think, and it'd be interesting to learn from the American experience, are there any caveats for the application of regulation to startups?
Yeah. Well, the answer to that last question is no, and maybe we could discuss this in a little bit greater detail. I mean, it's clearly it's an issue, and by the way, few, at least in the Silicon Valley, just to focus on Silicon Valley for a moment, the startups become global enterprises in no time. And I know the comment was made during the IP discussion, it's all territorial. Well, there may be commonality in terms of consumer protection issues in Europe, but there's still differences, and suddenly I'm doing business in 30 different countries. And trying to advise in a cost-effective ways, companies that are not necessarily flush with money, how to address that business. And you see some interesting I'm going to get off the subject a little bit. I mean, not every company has the money to invest to do things properly. So the practice of law, frankly, has changed dramatically in the United States. Sonia, I don't know if you agree, at least in our area, over the last 10 years. It's no longer about advising black letter law. You are basically helping the client make a risk assessment, and it's a business decision. And at the end of the day, you may go to them and say, there are 5 regulations here. The business decision will be, we will abide by A, we will abide by B, we will abide by C in our way, okay? And frankly, we're just going to wait and see what happens on the last 2. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer to your question. Let's talk about it some more. This has been a really terrific session. So I think, Bathika, you deserve a lot of applause for organizing just great panels. And I'll just make one last comment. And that is the other thing we're seeing big time. I mean, we've focused here for a couple of minutes on consumer protection, and we focused on particular, offerings. The consumer protection issues actually differ quite dramatically depending on whether you're looking at e-commerce sites or some of the new sharing, the OLAs of the world, and the other freight train coming at us now, the whole Internet of Things. The consumer, it adds to the complexity. So we have, I think, an obligation to our clients to do everything we can to keep up with what's going on and provide practical guidance that allows them to do what they do best, which is go out there and super please their customers. Thank you. Terrific panel.
Thank you, Mr. Mensik, all the speakers and the audience for this last yet very engaging session. And to acknowledge your ardent participation, may I request Ms. Anand to please present the memento, firstly to Mr. Michael S. Mensik, the moderator for the panel. Please put your hands together for him, ladies and gentlemen. Our next panelist, Mr. Arvind Singatia. And with your applauses to appreciate his efforts. Next, I would request her to present a memento to Mr. Faisal Farooqi. Ma'am, I would request you to please do the honors for Mr. Gaurav Kachru. And lastly, Ms. Nidhi Agarwal. Please put your hands together for the wonderful contribution of all the panelists. And yes, the panelists rise up for a group photograph again. Please. So with this, we come to an end of the sessions for this Confluence. Thank you so much, dignitaries. You may please occupy your respective places. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we'll now have a very short presentation of Litera, and to present the same, join me in welcoming Mr. Pradeep Menon, Managing Director, India, Litera. Ladies and gentlemen, Litera offers a comprehensive content risk management suite of cybersecure document creation, collaboration and control technology that provides organizations with unsurpassed.
But I represent a company which does business with lawyers. And we retain 99% of all our clients across the world. Just now, the moderator earlier was from Baker McKenzie. We are doing a huge implementation for them. I just brought Litera into India. And you can imagine the content confidence of a company whose 99% customers are legal firms. Our retention is 99%. We are working in a niche, and I'm very proud to represent this company. That's why I thank Bitika. I made a request that I think I should just start. I just started a month back here. We are actually in the process of setting up, and I mentioned to Manoj when I met him that content confidence is the most important thing which all of you should practice. I've been sitting here since morning. Of course, traffic delayed me, so I missed the first session. And I realized one thing about all of you eloquent lawyers. None of you were carrying any notes. You can speak. Your strength is to speak. It's all in your mind. How do you make sure that there are more and more equals in the company? That's what Litera does. That means that if you have made one ideal document for a particular practice, it will automatically archive it, create, and keep suggesting. And then you are controlling it. It is not that if your junior is doing that, you're not controlling the document. Multiple versions of the document are controlled. And I'm so proud that two of my clients, I just know that by email actually. Baker McKenzie is here, and Baker McKenzie is one of our biggest rollouts, which is our new customer there. I didn't know this, actually. In fact, when Bitika's team mentioned to me Baker McKenzie, I said, I've seen a mail. You know, we have this global mail going around. So why don't you? I mean, I don't want to take much time. I think I don't want to speak. No selling here. Product is good. It'll come, and you'll all enjoy it. I just thought
you have to pull content in from many sources, in and outside of the company. It's all on you. Where's that one document you need? Which is the most recent
Metadata removal is our patent. So if you buy the product from us or not, every mail that you send, the metadata gets removed because of Litera. Because if you see, or yourself and your customers are 30% of the communication is now happening on mobile devices. Nobody's sitting on a server environment. And if you are sending a mail from a public space, it should hit your server and the metadata to be removed. And in some cases, as far as US laws are concerned, if you're doing with pharmaceutical companies, and metadata has to go. It has to be part of it. So the system has to recognize that where to remove the metadata and where not to remove the metadata. So that's a very important part. I think, is there a problem in the HD? Video team. Let's skip the video then. If it's not coming, let's go to the globally. We started 15 years back. Value, integrity, innovation, and client satisfaction. Helping our clients achieve sustainable competitive advantage. You know, the biggest competitive advantage that you have is your knowledge base. Because in the literary world or the legal world, it's all here. What you're writing and what you're documenting is your knowledge. Right? Even the customers, we are all over. Now, all the business, most lawyers, big firms have their own server setup, they have perpetual licenses. We have to put it on the cloud, so it's open to even individual lawyers. We just won the Cool Vendor Gartner Award. We were the innovative solution provider and the CIO review. And what the biggest award, which when I was negotiating with Litera to come into India, the biggest thing that they told me, I just asked them one question. I said, what is your retention of customers? And when they said 99%, I said, I'm on. Because it's my job to find customers, but to retain them, the product and the service has to retain. We don't give so much of importance in the Indian context because ours is all about personal meetings, But ultimately, all the decisions that you're taking are being documented. And all of you lawyers know that the meeting is 1 hour and the document is 560 pages. And one error somewhere. And one track, and many customers would say the word offers a track change. What if anybody down the line does not accept the track change? What do you do? Everybody tries to improve your business, but I'm sure once you start using, you will understand that your peace of mind is my guarantee. See, what happens is that the legal business is about creating the document. With the essence of the nectar of the whole business is that document has to be foolproof. But the problem is this document is getting created by multiple people.